Dr. Elias Voss woke up to silence, not the usual quiet hum of the ship's systems or the soft beeps of life support. Just nothing. Dead air, cold. His head throbbed and his mouth tasted like metal. He blinked in the dim red emergency lighting, trying to remember what happened. The last thing he recalled was the alarm, sharp, urgent, and then a sound like thunder tearing through metal. After that, blackness. Now he was alone. He pushed himself up from the narrow bunk, wincing as his stiff muscles protested. The cabin was freezing. Frost clung to the edges of the viewport. Outside stars glittered like shards of glass against the endless black. Beautiful, deadly. Cal, he croaked, voice rough from disuse. Status report. The ship's AI responded instantly, calm and neutral as always. Life support at 38% oxygen. Main power offline. Communications array destroyed. Hull breach sealed in modules B and C. Crew status. Unresponsive. Elias's stomach dropped. Unresponsive? What does that mean? Biometric signals from Commander Lin, Dr. Patel, and Engineer Ruiz ceased 19 hours ago, Cal said. Cause rapid decompression following micrometeoroid impact. Elias sank back onto the bed, his breath coming fast. They were gone. All of them. Just like that. One tiny rock, no bigger than a pebble, screaming through space at 30,000 miles per hour, and it had punched a hole straight through the side of their ship. In seconds, air, heat, and lives had been sucked into the void. He was the only one who'd made it to a sealed compartment in time. Odyssey 7 wasn't supposed to be this far out. It was a science vessel, mapping ice deposits near the edge of the Kuiper Belt. Still within theoretical rescue range, but barely. Now, with comms dead and engines offline, they were drifting. No one knew where they were. No one was coming, but maybe someone could still hear him. He dragged himself to the command console, fingers numb as he tapped the screen. Most systems were dark, but the emergency beacon, thankfully, was on a separate circuit. It had activated automatically during the breach, sending out a repeating distress signal on every frequency it could. Civilian, military, even old deep space research bands. The problem? No one was listening this far out. Still, he had to try. He reprogrammed the beacon to include voice, a short looping message. This is Dr. Elias Voss of the Odyssey 7. We've suffered a catastrophic hull breach. 3 crew members lost. I am alone. Oxygen running low. Please respond. Coordinates attached, he played it back. His voice sounded thin, shaky, but clear. Then he powered down everything except the beacon and minimal life support. Every watt counted now. The lights dimmed further. The hum of the air recycler slowed to a whisper. He wrapped himself in a thermal blanket and sat by the viewport, staring into the dark. Days blurred together. He ate 1 meal bar a day, sipped water from a recycled pouch. He exercised in short bursts to keep his muscles from wasting away, though his limbs felt heavier each morning. He talked to Cal just to hear a voice, even if it wasn't human. Sometimes he replayed old mission logs, laughing at a joke the commander had made weeks ago. Other times he just sat in silence, watching the stars drift past like distant lighthouses in an ocean with no shore. He started marking time by oxygen percentage. 35%, 32%, 29%. Each drop felt like a countdown. One night, or what passed for night in the constant twilight of deep space, he thought he heard a voice. Faint, crackling through the static of the dead comms. He lunged for the console, heart pounding, but it was just noise, his mind playing tricks. He hadn't slept properly in days. The isolation was getting to him. He'd catch himself talking aloud to his crewmates as if they were still there. Once he swore he saw Patel's reflection in the glass, smiling sadly before vanishing. He knew the risks of solo deep space missions. NASA, ESA, even the newer private agencies, they all warned about psychological strain. But no simulation, no training could prepare you for this, floating in a metal coffin. Billions of miles from home with only your own thoughts for company. Still, he refused to give up. Every 12 hours he checked the beacon. Still broadcasting, still silent in return. On the 18th day, oxygen hit 22%. His hands trembled constantly now. His vision blurred at the edges. He knew he didn't have much time left. Maybe a week if he cut his rations again. But cutting rations meant weakness. Weakness meant he wouldn't be able to respond if someone finally heard him. So he kept the beacon going. Kept the message repeating. kept hope alive even as his body weakened. He began writing in a digital journal, not for anyone else, just for himself. "If anyone finds this," he typed one evening, "know that we tried. We weren't reckless. Space is just indifferent. It doesn't hate you. It doesn't care." And that's the scariest part. He saved the entry. Then he added one more line, "But I'm still here, and as long as I'm breathing, I'll keep sending the signal." Outside, the stars burned on, cold and eternal. Inside, a single human heart beat slowly, stubbornly, against the silence. He didn't know it yet, but hundreds of millions of miles away, a cargo freighter named Horizon's Resolve was adjusting its course. Its captain had just picked up a faint, repeating ping on an old emergency band, a signal so weak most would have dismissed it as cosmic noise. But she didn't. And that tiny decision, that act of listening, would change everything. For now, though Elias didn't know any of that, all he knew was the cold, the quiet, and the steady blink of the beacon light on the console, a tiny pulse of human will in the endless dark. He closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to rest. Tomorrow he'd check the signal again, and the day after that, and the day after that, because giving up wasn't an option, not while there was still air in his lungs, not while there was still a chance someone somewhere might answer. 3 weeks, that's how long it had been since the accident. 3 weeks of silence, cold, and the slow, quiet ticking down of oxygen. The ship felt less like a vessel and more like a tomb. Except tombs didn't have blinking lights or the occasional groan of stressed metal. Elias wasn't sleeping much anymore. When he did, his dreams were strange, full of voices, laughter, the smell of coffee from the mess hall. He'd wake up reaching for someone who wasn't there, heart racing only to find himself alone again in the dim red glow. He'd started talking to himself, not just quick notes to Cal anymore, but full conversations. "You think they'll find us?" He'd ask the empty chair across from him. Then, in a slightly higher voice, he'd answer, "If they're looking, yeah." He knew it was weird, dangerous even, but silence was worse. Silence made his thoughts spiral. His body was giving out too. His ribs showed under his skin. His hands shook when he tried to hold a water pouch steady. He'd lost so much muscle that standing for more than a few minutes left him dizzy. Exercise felt pointless now. What was the use of staying strong if no one was coming? But he forced himself anyway. 10 slow squats, arm circles, anything to keep blood moving. Food was down to crumbs. He'd stretched his rations as far as they'd go, eating half a bar one day, a quarter the next. Sometimes he'd hold a piece in his mouth for 10 minutes, letting it dissolve slowly, pretending it was a real meal. Once he found a forgotten protein cube stuck in a drawer. He cried when he saw it, not from sadness, but from something closer to relief. Like the universe had tossed him a tiny bone. The worst part wasn't hunger or cold, it was the doubt. Had Earth even noticed they were gone? Odyssey 7 was supposed to check in every 48 hours. They'd missed 3 scheduled pings. Surely someone had raised an alarm. But deep space was vast. Ships vanished all the time. Equipment failed, trajectories went wrong, comms died. Maybe they'd assumed the worst and moved on. Maybe they'd held a memorial and filed the mission under lost. He tried not to think about it. But at night, when the ship creaked and the stars outside seemed to stare back like indifferent eyes, the thought crept in, what if I die here and no one ever knows? Then, on the 22nd day, something changed. He was checking the beacon logs, same as always, when Cal interrupted. Anomaly detected on deep range band Delta 9. Elias froze. Repeat that. A faint repeating signal. Origin unknown. Pattern matches civilian transponder protocol. His heart slammed against his ribs. He scrambled to the console, fingers fumbling over the controls. The screen flickered to life, showing a jagged line of static with a tiny rhythmic blip buried inside it. It wasn't random noise. It was structured, intentional. Is it a response? He whispered. Unclear, Cal replied. Signal strength is extremely low. Could be echo interference or a ship. Elias finished, breathless. He boosted the receiver's gain, straining to hear. For hours he sat there, headphones pressed to his ears, listening to the hiss and crackle of deep space. And then there it was again. A clear, steady pulse. Not a voice. Not a message. Just a ping, like someone tapping on a pipe in the dark saying, I'm here. Hope flared hot and bright in his chest. He sent a burst transmission toward the signal's origin, just his voice raw and urgent. "This is Odyssey 7. Do you read me?" "Please respond." Silence. He waited. 1 hour, 2, 6. Nothing came back. Maybe it wasn't real. Maybe his mind had stitched together noise into meaning. Desperate for a lifeline. He'd read about this. Sensory deprivation could make people hear things, see things. Maybe he was finally cracking. But the next day the ping came again. Same time, same rhythm. This time he didn't transmit. He just listened. Let the sound wash over him like a promise. Someone was out there. Maybe not close. Maybe not coming for him. But there. He started marking the pings in his journal. Little ticks on the calendar. Day 23, ping at 14:07. Day 24, ping at 14:09. Always around the same time. Always steady, he began preparing, just in case. He charged the emergency suit's battery. Checked the seals on the helmet. Laid out tools he might need for a rescue docking. He even tried to clean up the cabin, wiping frost from the walls, straightening loose cables. It felt silly, like getting dressed for a date when you weren't even sure the other person knew your name. But it gave him something to do, something to believe in. Then on day 26, the ping stopped. No warning, no fade out, just gone. Elias waited all day, all night. Nothing. The silence that followed was heavier than before. It wasn't just empty, it was cruel. Like the universe had dangled hope in front of him, then yanked it away. He slumped against the console, tears hot on his cheeks. He hadn't realized how much he'd leaned on that tiny signal until it vanished. For 2 days, he barely moved. He skipped meals, let the cold seep deeper into his bones. What was the point? But on the third morning, something inside him pushed back. No, he wasn't done yet. He forced himself up, drank half a pouch of water, did 5 shaky push-ups. Then he went back to the console and activated the beacon again. Stronger this time, overriding power limits. Let it drain the last of the batteries. Let it scream into the void, because if that ship was still out there, maybe it just hadn't heard him clearly enough, or maybe it was coming. And if it was, he needed to be ready. Not just alive, but alert, aware, human. So he washed his face with cold water, combed his tangled hair, put on a clean shirt from the emergency kit, sat by the viewport and watched the stars, not with despair, but with quiet determination. Out there somewhere, another human being had sent a signal, and that meant he wasn't truly alone. Not yet. As long as that thought remained, he'd keep fighting. Keep listening. Keep waiting. Because in the endless dark, even the smallest connection, a single ping across millions of miles, could be enough to hold on to, and sometimes, that's all you need to stay human. The freighter wasn't built for rescues. It was a workhorse, old, boxy, patched together with spare parts and stubbornness. Its job was simple: haul supplies between Mars orbit and the outer stations, drop off cargo, pick up waste, and keep moving. No drama, no heroics, just honest, boring work in the cold dark. But that day, something changed. The captain was reviewing routine sensor logs when a blip caught her eye. Tiny, almost lost in the background noise. Most would have ignored it. Static, cosmic rays, a glitch in the system, but she'd been flying deep routes long enough to know the difference between random noise and a signal trying to be heard. This one had rhythm, a pattern, a heartbeat. She called the engineer over. "You seeing this?" He squinted at the screen. "Could be echo from a dead satellite. Or just interference. Run a filter," she said. "Narrow it to emergency bands." Minutes later, the truth surfaced. A repeating distress ping, weak but clear, broadcasting on an old civilian frequency, barely used anymore, but still monitored by a few long-haul ships like theirs. The coordinates placed it far off their route near the edge of the Kuiper Belt. Way too far for any official rescue. Way too risky, the navigator shook his head. Even if it's real, we'd lose 2 weeks of schedule. Fuel's tight. And what if it's just debris? The engineer added, or a ghost signal. Happens all the time out here. Systems fail, beacons loop forever. The captain didn't answer right away. She stared at the blinking dot on the screen. Then she thought of her brother, lost years ago when his survey pod went dark near Phobos. No signal, no warning, just silence. They'd never found his body, never got closure. Just a file marked presumed lost. She took a breath. "We're going." The crew exchanged glances. No one argued. They knew that look, knew what it meant to carry that kind of weight. Course correction began immediately. The freighter, heavy with cargo, groaned as its thrusters fired, slowly turning away from its planned path. Every hour added meant delays, fines, angry messages from the depot. But none of that mattered now. Not if someone was out there alone sending that signal into the void. 11 days passed. 11 days of tense checks, recalculations, and quiet hope. The signal never stopped. It kept pinging, steady, patient, like a hand waving in the dark, saying, "I'm still here." On the 12th day, they saw it. A small research vessel tumbling slowly, dark except for one blinking red light on its hull. No engine glow. No comms chatter. Just silence and stars. The captain hailed it. "Odyssey 7, this is Freighter Horizons Resolve. Do you copy? Static." Then a voice, thin, cracked, barely there, came through. "You're real?" The whole bridge went still. That voice wasn't recorded. It wasn't a loop. It was human, alive. "Yes," the captain said, her own voice thick. "We're real. Hold on. We're coming." Inside Odyssey 7, Elias had almost stopped believing. He'd heard the freighter's approach on passive sensors, but part of him thought it was another trick of his mind. Until he saw it through the viewport, solid, real, its light steady against the black. And then the voice, warm, human, not a dream. He fumbled with the comms, hands shaking so badly he dropped the headset twice. When he finally got it on, all he could say was, "Thank you." Over and over. "Thank you. Thank you." Back on the freighter, the crew sprang into action. They weren't trained for rescues, but they knew space. Knew risk, knew what it meant to be stranded. They prepped the airlock, checked tethers, ran diagnostics on their own life support in case they needed to bring someone aboard fast. The captain stayed on comms. "We see you. You're not alone anymore." She didn't promise safety. Didn't say everything would be okay. She just stayed on the line, talking. About the weather near Mars. About the terrible coffee on board. About anything to keep that voice from fading back into silence. Meanwhile, the engineer worked out a plan. Docking was impossible. Odyssey 7's port was wrecked. But if the person inside could get into a suit and make a short EVA transfer, they might pull it off. It was dangerous, especially for someone who'd been alone for weeks, weak and disoriented. But it was the only shot. They sent instructions slowly, clearly. "Check your suit seals. Test your oxygen, move slow. We've got a tether ready. You don't have to do this alone." From the other end, Elias listened, tears streaming down his face. Not from fear, but from relief. Someone was with him, not just nearby, but truly with him, guiding him, believing he could make it. As the freighter matched Odyssey 7's drift, holding steady in the endless night, the two ships hung side by side like old friends meeting after a long war. One dark and broken, the other battered but alive, and between them a single, fragile thread of human connection, spoken in calm voices, steady hands, and the simple act of turning a ship around for a whisper in the dark. No one on that freighter saw themselves as heroes. They were just people doing what felt right. But in that moment, choosing to listen when others might have looked away, they became something more. They became the answer to a signal no one else thought was worth hearing. And sometimes, that's all it takes to bring someone back from the edge of forever. The rescue didn't happen fast. Nothing in space ever does. When the freighter finally matched Odyssey 7's drift and came into view, a bulky, boxy shape against the starfield, its running lights blinking like a cautious hello, Elias felt something he hadn't in weeks. Fear. Not of dying, but of failing at the last moment. Of slipping, of freezing up, of watching salvation float just out of reach. The freighter couldn't dock. Odyssey 7's main port was twisted metal, sealed shut after the breach. That meant Elias had to get to them, on his own, in a spacesuit, after nearly a month of barely moving, surviving on crumbs and hope. He stared at the suit hanging in the airlock locker like it was a monster. It weighed nothing in 0G, but his arms trembled just thinking about pulling it on. His muscles had wasted. His balance was shot. One wrong move during the transfer and he'd drift away forever, but there was no other way. Cal walked him through every step, voice calm, patient. Seal the inner hatch. Purge the airlock. Check your oxygen, helmet on. Lock confirmed. Each instruction felt like climbing a mountain. Sweat stung his eyes inside the helmet. His breath echoed loud in his ears. Outside, the universe opened up. Vast, silent, beautiful. The freighter hung only 30 meters away, tether lines already snaking out from its side like lifelines thrown by a stranger who refused to look away. A voice crackled in his helmet, real, human, warm with urgency. "Can you hear me?" "Nod if you can hear me." Elias nodded hard, blinking back tears. He could hear. He could hear? "Okay. Take it slow. Use the handrails. We've got you on tether. You're not alone." Step by step, hand over hand, he pulled himself across the void. Every movement burned. His legs shook. His vision grayed at the edges more than once. But he kept going. Because on the other side wasn't just a ship, it was voices, warmth, the smell of real food, the sound of another heartbeat. When his gloved hand finally gripped the freighter's outer hatch, a cheer erupted over the comms. Real laughter. Real relief. Inside it was chaos, but the good kind. People moved fast, speaking in quick, overlapping sentences. Someone helped him out of the suit. Another wrapped him in thick blankets. A third pressed a warm cup into his hands, broth simple and salty, the best thing he'd ever tasted. He couldn't stop shaking. Not from cold, from the shock of being touched. Of hearing voices that weren't in his head. Of seeing faces that looked back at him with concern, not indifference. They ran scans, checked his vitals, gave him fluids through a small IV in his arm. His skin was pale, almost translucent. Bruises from bumping into walls in 0G dotted his arms. His hair was matted, his beard wild. He looked like a ghost, and maybe for a while he had been one. Between sips of broth, he managed to ask, Why did you come?" The captain, a woman with tired eyes and steady hands, sat beside him. "Because your signal was still blinking," she said simply. "And as long as it was, we had to try." He learned then that Earth had given up weeks ago. No search, no rescue mission. Too far, too risky, too expensive. But this crew? They were just passing through, hauling supplies to a Mars orbital station, when they caught the faintest whisper on an old emergency frequency. Most would have ignored it, called it static. But they didn't. They turned their ship around. Spent 11 days chasing a ghost and found a man still breathing. Over the next few hours, they stabilized him, gave him vitamins, electrolytes, gentle stretches to wake up his muscles. They didn't bombard him with questions. Didn't treat him like a spectacle. Just let him rest, eat, breathe. Someone even brought him a clean set of clothes. Soft, worn cotton, nothing fancy, but it felt like luxury against his skin. At one point, he looked out the freighter's main viewport. Odyssey 7 floated nearby, dark and silent now, its beacon finally switched off. It looked so small, so fragile. He thought of his crewmates still inside, lost to the void. A lump rose in his throat, but he didn't cry. Not yet, grief would come later. For now, he just felt grateful. Overwhelmingly, deeply grateful. The crew treated him like family, shared stories over meals, let him sit in the common area, wrapped in blankets, listening to the hum of a ship that was alive. With people, with purpose, with noise. Real noise, not the silence he'd lived with for so long. One of the engineers showed him how they'd tracked his signal. "It was barely there," he said, tapping a screen, like someone whispering from the bottom of a well. "But we heard it." Elias nodded. "I kept sending it, even when I thought no one would ever hear." "That's what saved you," the engineer said. "You didn't stop." Later, as he lay in a real bunk, soft mattress, clean sheets, gravity gently pulling him down, he stared at the ceiling and let himself believe it was real. He was safe. He was going home. But more than that, he was seen. Not just a lost signal. Not just a failed mission, but a person. Worth turning a ship around for. Worth 11 days of detour. Worth the risk. That night, for the first time in weeks, he slept without dreaming of silence. And when he woke, the smell of coffee filled the cabin. Someone had made it just for him. No grand speeches, no medals, just kindness, just humanity. And in the end, that was everything. 6 months after the rescue, he stood in front of a room full of officials, scientists and reporters. But all he could think about was how quiet it was. Not the silence of space, but the heavy, waiting kind. Like the whole room was holding its breath. He wasn't there to be a hero. He didn't want awards or headlines. He was there because someone had to speak for the ones who never made it back, and for the ones who might still be out there, drifting in the dark, hoping someone would listen. He told them everything. Not just the facts, The oxygen levels, the beacon signal, the rescue, but the human part. The loneliness that gnawed at your bones. The way your mind starts playing tricks when there's no one to talk to. The fear that no one even knew you were gone. He spoke about how close he came to giving up. Not because he wanted to die, but because hope felt like a waste of energy. And then he told them about the freighter. About the crew who changed course for a whisper. About the captain who said, "As long as the signal was blinking, we had to try." That simple sentence, he said, was worth more than any protocol or policy. After his testimony, things started to change. Slowly, but surely. New rules were written. Every deep space vessel now had to carry 2 independent emergency beacons, one hidden in the hull in case the main one failed. Rescue protocols were updated. No mission would be declared lost without at least one search attempt, no matter how far out it was. And for the first time, mental health support became mandatory for solo or long-duration missions, not as an afterthought, but as essential as oxygen. But none of that felt real to him until he saw the new training modules being used at the academy. Young explorers, nervous, bright-eyed, learning not just how to fix engines or read star charts, but how to cope with silence, how to recognize the signs of isolation, how to keep sending the signal even when it feels pointless. He visited the freighter crew a few times. They'd become something like family, not because they'd saved his life, but because they'd reminded him what it meant to be human. They didn't treat him like a miracle or a cautionary tale. They just made room for him at the table, poured him coffee, asked how he was really doing. Sometimes they didn't talk at all, just sat together, watching ships come and go from the spaceport, comfortable in the quiet. He still had bad nights. Nights when he'd wake up gasping, convinced he was back on Odyssey 7 alone again. Nights when the stars outside his window looked too much like the ones that watched him drift. But now he knew what to do. He'd get up, make tea, call someone, anyone, and just hear a voice. That was enough. He turned down most interview requests. But one afternoon, a small documentary team asked if he'd share his story, not for drama, but to help others understand the real cost of pushing into the unknown. He agreed, on one condition: they'd also interview the freighter crew. Because, as he told the camera, "I didn't survive because I was strong. I survived because someone chose to care." The video went quiet for a while, then started getting shared, not by news outlets, but by teachers, engineers, even kids dreaming of space. Comments poured in. "This made me check on my friend today. Now I understand why my dad always says listen even when it's hard. Thank you for reminding us that people matter more than plans." He never got used to the attention, but he kept speaking, not loudly, not often, but clearly, because if his story could make one ship turn around for a faint signal, or one person reach out to someone feeling alone, then it was worth telling. One evening, months later, he stood at a viewing platform near Cape Canaveral, watching a new deep space vessel lift off. It carried supplies, science gear, and a crew of 6. Among them was a young exobiologist, someone who'd read his testimony and decided to go anyway, knowing the risks, but also knowing there were now better safeguards, better backup, better chances. As the rocket climbed into the sky, trailing fire and hope, he didn't feel fear. He felt something quieter, deeper. Responsibility, not to warn people away from the stars, but to make sure they never had to face the void alone. Later, walking back to his car, he passed a group of kids staring up at the fading contrail. One of them turned to him and asked, "Do you think they'll be okay out there?" He smiled. "They will," he said, "because this time we're listening." He drove home under a sky full of stars, not cold and indifferent anymore, but familiar. Watched, connected. He still carried the silence with him like a scar, but now it didn't define him. What defined him was the choice he'd made every day since, to keep reaching out, to keep believing that someone, somewhere, would answer. And in the end, that's what space exploration was really about. Not just going farther, but making sure no one gets left behind on the way.